stories today. Um, Next week, Wednesday, January 29th, is Chinese New Year's. And we have a special guest today. But before I introduce our special guest, just a reminder again to please fill out the QR code, the evaluation that is connected to the QR code. That helps us a lot in getting better at these types of events for next semester, and it helps with funding for the next event. I'd like to thank our sponsors again, Kilohana, Kipuka, Center for Global Communication, and Chanta's office. So, without any further ado, today's topic is about being an American-born Chinese. And I would like to introduce you, dear friend. We grew up together, classmates from high school. Um, Most recently, and now formally, the president of the um, Chinese Civic Association Hawai'i, but now, so most recently and newly, the Deputy Director of Research and Development. I would like to welcome you all to Dennis Lin.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Kobe, for the warm welcome. My name is Dennis Lin, and as Kobe said, I'm the Deputy Director for the County of Hawaii Department of Research and Development. Um, and I've been the president of the Chinese Civic Association of Hawaii, I would say from 2019 up until I got this recent job. And I had to resign just because of conflicts of interest for the government. But I've been honored to serve as this deputy director for the county. So today's topic is about being an American-born Chinese. And for many American-born Chinese, our parents have always called us ABCs. From the time we were very small, it's like, hey, you lucky to be an ABC, right? You're lucky you were born in America. You're lucky to be living in the American dream. So what does that mean? So a little bit about me and how I grew up and how Chinese culture and the values of Chinese culture really shaped who I am today. So the history of Chinese here in Hawaii dates back to plantation days, right? When there were sugarcane plantations that needed migrant workers, immigrant workers. So the Chinese were part of the group that came here with the Japanese, the Koreans, the Filipinos, the Portuguese, and they developed communities within the towns here in Hilo, Hawai'i, in Lapahoihoi, all those different plantation areas. And that's how the Chinese community grew here in Hawaii, or here on Hawaii Island. And as people were able to move up and live the American dream, they went from the plantations to being small business owners, to being professional working class citizens. They became doctors, lawyers, architects. A lot of the small businesses you see around downtown, you may not know if you're not from Hawaii Island, that there was actually a town before that. All up front where Bayfront Highway is, that used to be Shinmachi. And Shinmachi town was full of businesses that were made up of those immigrant population. They built a whole new town, which is why it's called Shinmachi, new town. So, some of the long-standing Chinese people here in Hilo used to own businesses. Their grandparents or their great-grandparents used to own a business along that strip of downtown. After the 1960s tsunami, that whole thing disappeared and left us with what is now downtown Hilo. But with that disruption of that town, we also lost a lot of the history, right? And so for me, it's always going back to the roots of what does it mean to be Chinese? What does it mean to be, brought up here in Hilo? So my parents came in the early 1980s. My mom came a few years before that, but they came from a town called Zhongshan, which is in the southern part of Guangdong province in the mainland part of China. their upbringing was of poverty. At that time, China was in a civil war. Mao Zedong and his actual brother-in-law were in a big conflict, fighting for the nation's sovereignty, um, and people did not have food to eat. Everything that was grown on your property was owned by the government. So when my mom's auntie, my grandpa's sister, got the opportunity to come to America, she petitioned everybody else to come. Um, and what remains today of that connection is Some Liang's, which, if you guys grew up here, is the one next to KTA. That is the auntie that brought everybody here. Her brother is Liang's down by the highway. My parents used to own a restaurant called Canton Kitchen right below the university, where I think now there's H&K Lunch Shop, where that strip mall is. My uncle used to own a restaurant down in Kilohana called Oceanfront Kitchen. And it's still there, but it's just under different ownership. But that's where my family, settled, right, is here in Hilo. And growing up, it was hard to meet expectations, because if you're from an Asian family, they don't want you to grow up in the same way that they did. If you're going through, if they're doing hard labor kind of work, right? We don't want you to be a farmer. We don't want you to be in the restaurant business or food service business. We don't want you to doing these, tough jobs. We want you to get an education. We want you to get a good job, a good paying job. And, the stereotypical is like, you gotta be an accountant, lawyer, a doctor, because in Chinese, each one of them have a, it's called a shi, right? It's like a professional designation to them, right? So they always want you to be that. But here, for me, it was like, I'm trying really hard to meet your expectations, but I also want to be embedded within the local community. I want to be able to make friends and not just be that person at my desk every day studying for these tests, being good at math, right? And the values of hard work, the values of making sure that you achieve goals, and it may be counterproductive of you don't want to be um, you want people to be overachiever, but you don't want them to be overachiever. Um, so that's kind of that background. So those values were embedded in me, but it grounded me in the sense that when I didn't get to those specific landmarks, right, it was still okay. So I would say that that introduction of those Chinese values are good and bad. They're bad in sense of you shouldn't ever force those upon your kids, because it puts a lot of pressure on them. But it's also good in terms of you provide that standard for them that you should never be just doing the bare minimum. Try to do your best at all times. So, the topic is, building community through conversation. And what I found is whenever I talk to people and talk about, I have a small business that I teach how to make Chinese food. It's part of our culture. And how do we connect with our culture? Here in Hawaii, we have so many melting pots of culture. And we're going to go into some of the questions I have for you, but the Chinese community has always embraced their culture. And we do things a little bit differently just because of how we were brought up within that culture. So yeah, that's kind of, my background. I came here to UH, but because of my upbringing, I had, you know, applied all different places. And I told my parents, hey, I got a full tuition ride to Washington State University. And I said, well, we're not going to pay for that. We're not going to pay for your dorming and your food and whatnot. So then, you know, you kind of get a conflicting point of view, right? Yay, you did good. But then now you're not going to pay for it and I got to go work hard and get my own, um, success, right? So, I remained here and I was able to get my bachelor's in business administration. Through my time here, I was able to build connections to get into the career path that, went from lawyer's office to commercial banking to community and government relations. And now I'm here at working in government. Um, so I would just say being an American born Chinese was not easy. And I think a lot of people who um, are brought up in that first or second generation of being uh, Chinese is not easy. My parents are first generation. They came from not knowing a single word of English to me being born here, taking ESL classes because Chinese was my first language, right? Um, it's it's not an easy path, but it also gives you that base that you worked hard to get to where you are, and you just hope that nobody else has to go through the same process, but you help people get to that same understanding of it's okay. You have standards, but as long as you're trying your best to get to those standards, even if you fail, you did your best. And I think that's what I've been trying to ground myself in. My brother had a different path. Um, he had a much harder path than I did, being the second born, um, because now you're in Big Brother's shadow. Um, so yeah, that would be my little background. Before I head into the questions, any questions from you guys that you want to learn more about me? Um,
Right. I should know this, but what does a deputy director of research and development do for the county?
yeah, so the Department of Research and Development is the economic development office of the county. We do some data gathering and research through contracting with outside parties to come up with studies and statistical data. The economic development side is we're trying to just provide programs and support for the community to improve quality of life. That's really our main goal. As deputy director, I manage the day-to-day operations under the director. Yeah. Yeah.
So it's a lot of different. Yeah.
It's a lot of different things. I mean, we cover a whole span from agriculture to tourism to food systems, business development, uh, film, and creative industries. Yeah.
So any advice for our undergraduates, in particular, if they wanted to stay here on the island, sort of an industry that you see as
Mm-hmm.
growing?
Yeah, I would say regenerative tourism is definitely the direction that industry is going. So how do we make it so that we're not reliant on just people coming in, but what is their value when they come in and how their impact is on our environment and our economy, right? It shouldn't just be we're just going to divert them all to the Kona Coast or going to divert them all to Waikiki and spend their money they're spending on luxury goods and whatnot. But really, what is the experience that we want them to have and take away when they leave our islands, right? And going back to the roots of, is there a circular economy aspect where we are not now just inviting people to come, but contributing? So, the old Hawaiian aspect of the ahupua'a, where the land provides, we also want to make sure that they have some aspect where they're contributing to that flow of resources.
Can you share a little bit about your the business that you have and teaching?
Oh yeah, so it's kind of like a
Like that's your Tell me background.
It's a passion project. We started it back in early last year, and it was really, because Hilo doesn't have a lot of options for Chinese food. And one of the things was, I really enjoy dim sum, and I was trying to, I just made stuff that I liked, and then my wife was like, "Well, you should really consider teaching or selling this stuff." So we started off with some small workshops at the YMCA. Then we went into like some pop-up kind of events. But when I do my presentations, I talk about food because food is culture, no matter which culture you're in, right? Food is a defining aspect of your culture. So by sharing food, we're sharing culture, and we're sharing it with our community. So that's kind of what we do. Yeah.